Now let's dive a little bit deeper into UV mapping. Now, in this lesson, we're going to show you how to map a complex object to a single image. Now, typically, when you work with objects in Maya, you'll want to UV map one object to one texture. So in this case, we have this receiver, or at least the box of the receiver, and we want to texture it with this image. Now, this image has all the different textures that we are going to use on that particular object. And we need to unfold the object so that it matches this. Now, in production, it usually makes sense to have one texture per object. You don't want multiple images and textures going to one object because it gets kind of messy. So let's show you how to map this to this one texture. So the first thing I want to do is apply the texture. So I'm going to just do a simple blend material. And let's go into the attribute editor, and under color, I'm going to click on the checkerboard, select file, open the file, and we have an image out here called stereouv.jpg. And when we apply that map, well, it's not right. So this is where the UV editor comes in. So let's take a look at that UV editor. And you can see here that I've got my image, and then all the different faces of this object are kind of mapped all over the place here. So let's go ahead and select all of these UV shells. So I'm going to right click in the UV editor, select UV shell, and then just box select everything. And I'm going to move it off because I want a clean workspace here. So we're going to start moving all of this detail back a little bit at a time. So let's start off with the front of this object here. So the receiver face here, you can see we've got this and this here. So we've got really all the polygons here are all over the place. So I'm going to select the center of this face and then just do Shift greater than and select the whole thing. And as you can see, this is really all over the map. But like we did before, we can put a planar map onto this. Now we can do this in one of two places. We can go into UV planar, but we can also do this in our UV editor by doing create planar, and that creates a planar map. But as you can see, it's rotated off, and we ran into this problem before. So let's go into our attribute editor and make our projection width a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and make that say 1. And then let's rotate that 0 degrees in Y. So now that's flat to the object. And when we go back into our UV editor, you can see that now this is a plane. And all the parts are now stuck together. So let's just use our move and our scale tools to align this with the part of the image that it's supposed to align with. So I'm going to go ahead and use scale to bring it down. And then move it, do some more scaling, and fine-tune that into place. And there we go. So now the front part of this is aligned. Now if I want, I can right-click above this and do UV and select just those UVs and move those as well. So I can move either the entire shell or the UVs themselves. I'm going to go back into shell mode. And now let's do something a little bit simpler here, which might be the top or the bottom of this particular object here. So right now, I've got this plane here, which is essentially the top. So if I rotate that and move it into place, you'll see that we can basically get this without too much problem. Now this has already been mapped a little bit, but one of the things about this is that we have the sides of this, which are here, are actually part of the side panels. So these side panels are supposed to be wood. So let's go ahead and texture those. Now we can do that by selecting all of the polygons and then mapping them, and then we may have to do some additional work. So I'm going to go ahead and select face, and then shift select all of these side faces here, and as you can see, it's this object in the UV editor. But then I'm going to expand that by one face by hitting greater than, and now you can see that all of these other faces are really, again, all over the map. So let's map this using automatic mapping, and that brings it here. Again, the scale's a little bit off, but let's take these different parts and stick them together. So what this did was it did automatic mapping, which essentially shoots mapping from all of the different axes, so X, Y, and Z. And because this has 5 sides, we have 5 different little UV shells here. So again, I'm in UV shell mode here. And so each one of these shells is a separate map. But we want this all to stick together. So we can do that by using a couple of tools here. So the first object here is the side, and as you can see, the top of this has a smaller face along the top, and so that's how we can tell where the top is versus the bottom. So this face, or this UV shell, is actually the very top of that. So let's go ahead and align that and kind of stitch everything together. So we can do that by moving into place, right-clicking, going into UV mode, and then if the UVs are aligned, so if I select both of these, you can see that it's this top back corner. If we do a cut sew, stitch together, that should stitch everything here together. So let's select the front and back and do cut sew, stitch together. And now that heavy line goes away, and this is all one UV shell. So now I've created a shell. Let's do the same on the other side. So one of the things about this is that you need to make sure that these are aligned. So this and this need to be aligned, but if we look at it from the bottom, you'll see that they're opposite corners. So actually this one here needs to be aligned with this one. So I'm going to select this UV shell and rotate it 180 degrees all the way around, and then again move it into place. And then go back into UV mode. So if I select this one, it's that outside corner, and this one here is that front corner. And again, cut sew, stitch together. So now, if I select this UV shell, I've got all of these, but I still need the front and the back. So the front panel is this one. Now remember, the front is down here. So this panel aligns with the bottom. So I'm going to select those. I'm selecting UVs. You can select the shell or UVs. It doesn't really matter. And then rotate that 90. Move it into place. Select all the UVs. And again, we're just going to cut and sew. And let's do the same for the top here. Again, we're going to select that. Rotate it around. Make sure you get the right direction. So again, you can tell by the detail here. So this thin side here aligns with the corresponding side. And then stitch together. So now that I have all this, I have a UV shell. And all of this side is now one object here in the UV editor. It makes it much easier to manage. And now I can scale that and move that into place and position it and get my texture exactly the way that I want. And because these are all stitched together, the texture will be continuous along all of these edges. So if we go back in object mode here, you can see that this is a very nice texture. It goes very seamlessly over those edges. And so now that we understand this process, we can do the rest of this. I've gone ahead and opened up my final version, and we've basically done the same process on the other parts of this object. So if we go into the UV editor, you'll see that now it's very, very nicely arranged. So I have a UV shell here, And actually that's a little bit off there, so we can move that into place. So I have a UV shell here for the side, for the top, the bottom, the back, and so on. And this is all on one image. So now I don't have to manage multiple images. I can just use one image for the entire object.